The stage was set on a primetime national broadcast, one of those town hall-style interviews meant to feel intimate but always reeked of strategy. Governor Gavin Newsom leaned comfortably against the armrest, smile rehearsed, voice smooth like a Malibu breeze. He spoke of progress, sanctuary, and what he called compassionate governance. California, he said, was leading the way. But backstage, a different storm was forming. Karoline Leavitt stood in the green room, clutching a thin black folder. Her expression was unreadable, but not calm. Inside that folder weren't campaign talking points. They were names of veterans denied housing, mental health services, or basic medical aid in Newsom's California. Just hours earlier, a clip had gone viral, Newsom proudly boasting a $15 million expansion of migrant shelter programs in Los Angeles. But what caught Karoline's attention wasn't the number, it was the timing. Just days before, she had spoken to the widow of a veteran who died sleeping in a parking garage outside a VA center in the same city. Karoline wasn't on the guest list. She wasn't invited to sit in the polished chairs or sip the sparkling water. But she didn't care. Moments before the cameras rolled, she made a call, straight to the show's producers. And she gave them a choice: either I walk out on that stage and speak, or I walk out of here and speak louder. They agreed. Reluctantly. Tension crackled through the studio as a third chair was added, off-angle from Newsom. No rehearsal. No prep. Just one rule: stay civil. That rule would be shattered in less than 5 minutes. Newsom didn't see her at first. He was mid-sentence about California's model of inclusive aid when the producer's voice crackled into his ear: "We're bringing in a third voice for balance." Karoline stepped onto the stage like a storm front. She wore no makeup but carried conviction like armor. The black folder was clutched in one hand. A tiny American flag pin glinted on her blazer. Newsom's face stiffened. The audience shifted. The moderator stuttered. Joining us now is Karoline Leavitt, former White House staffer and veterans advocate, who has a different perspective. Karoline didn't sit. She opened the folder. And the nation held its breath. Karoline didn't even glance at the moderator. She didn't ease into pleasantries or toss compliments. She walked right up to the space between Newsom and the camera, holding her folder like it was a blade. Her voice rang out, clear and deliberate. "You said $15 million for migrant shelters in LA. My question is simple: how much did California spend this year helping homeless veterans?" The crowd fell silent. Newsom tried to keep his face composed, the corners of his mouth twitching. "Karoline, I appreciate your passion, but this conversation isn't about choosing between compassion and..." She cut him off without flinching. "It is exactly about choosing, Governor. You chose. You fund illegals. You ignore veterans. And we have the receipts." She opened the folder and pulled out a printed document, an audit report from the California Department of Housing. She held it up to the camera as if daring anyone to deny its contents. "Your administration allocated more money to converting hotels into shelters for non-citizens than you did to veteran mental health crisis units. That's a fact." The moderator tried to intervene. "Let's keep this from becoming..." Karoline turned, sharp. "No. Let's make it about what matters. Because every time this man smiles for a headline about sheltering strangers, he's stepping over the men and women who fought for the flag behind him." She pointed toward the backdrop, where the American flag hung center stage, neatly folded, politely distant. "Do you even know how many veterans are sleeping in Skid Row tonight?" she asked. "I do. 47. I met one of them yesterday. He lost his legs in Fallujah. He lost his housing under you." Newsom tried to speak, but Karoline wasn't finished. "You brag about sanctuary," she said, walking directly toward his chair. "But what you've built isn't sanctuary. It's betrayal. You prioritize headlines over heroes." The air in the room was brittle. The moderator looked stunned. The producers behind the camera were frozen, eyes darting between the teleprompter and the director's chair. Newsom cleared his throat. "California is proud to support all people in need, regardless of their background. We believe in dignity for everyone." Karoline stepped forward again. Then why don't veterans get that dignity first? Why do we have Gold Star families living out of vans while your state budget covers hotel suites for people who broke our laws to enter this country? Her voice didn't waver, and the silence that followed was heavier than applause. The air had turned cold, no matter the studio lights. Newsom leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, blinking slowly like a man trying to buy time with calm. But Karoline wasn't backing down. She stepped toward the moderator's desk and dropped a new stack of papers on it, California's FY budget, color-coded and marked. This is your spending, Governor. Page 92. Line 14. Over $1.2 billion for undocumented immigrant services, healthcare, legal aid, housing, education grants. Tell me where that number is for veterans. Newsom didn't even look down. That's a mischaracterization. No, it's the truth, she said. The part you don't want voters to read between headlines. The only thing being mischaracterized is your idea of leadership. Gasps rippled through the audience. Karoline turned directly to the camera now. Her tone lowered, not for drama, but for weight. You want to talk about compassion? Then look at this man, she said, holding up a photo of a veteran named Thomas Hayes. Silver Star. Homeless. Found frozen outside a convenience store in San Bernardino last winter. You know what his daughter told me? She paused. She said, my father bled for this state, and they couldn't even give him a warm cot. She faced Newsom again. And you? You slept just fine that night, didn't you? Newsom blinked hard, visibly shaken for the first time. Karoline, I'm not going to sit here and be villainized. You already sat, she shot back. That's the problem. You sat when you should have stood. You handed out checks to non-citizens while ignoring the American blood drying on California sidewalks. The moderator raised a hand, nervously. Let's try to keep this focused on solutions. Karoline turned sharply. This is the solution. Name the priority. The American people are watching. Are you proud of this record? Proud of the state that left veterans on waiting lists while fast-tracking undocumented migrants into rent-free apartments? Newsom's lips parted, but nothing came out. Karoline stepped toward him again, slowly this time. Look at me and answer it. Not with spin. Not with a speech. With truth. Because every dollar you redirected from an American veteran to someone who came here illegally has a name, a flag, and a grave behind it. The studio went dead quiet. Somewhere, a producer whispered, "We're live." And Karoline didn't blink. She just stared at Newsom, unflinching, unmoved, and unmistakably resolved. Karoline didn't wait for Newsom to gather his thoughts. She stepped forward again, lifting her voice not with anger, but with something far more cutting, clarity. You sit in Sacramento and pretend you understand, she said, facing him but speaking to America. But I've walked Skid Row. I've prayed with veterans in tents under freeway ramps. I've held the hand of a man with no legs and a Purple Heart who said, "No one sees me anymore." You see campaign donors. I see the cost. Newsom finally leaned in, his voice tight. You're exploiting trauma for politics. No, Karoline said sharply, her eyes narrowing. You're funding chaos and calling it compassion. She turned to the moderator. You want facts? Here they are. California spent more on migrant hotel rooms last year than it did on mental health services for homeless veterans. Do you deny that? The moderator hesitated. Newsom shook his head. That's a false equivalency. The veteran crisis is a national problem. Karoline raised a finger. Then lead. You brag about California being a model for the nation. So model this. Stop using taxpayer money to house non-citizens while our heroes die in the cold. The audience murmured. Some clapped. Newsom's jaw tightened again. Karoline walked over to the second podium and pulled out a pair of boots, dusty, worn, with a faded name tag stitched inside. These belonged to Staff Sergeant Luis Ramirez. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Lost everything when he came home. Do you know what his suicide note said? She held it up. I fought for a country that forgot me. I watched my shelter turn away veterans while welcoming migrants with food, beds, and lawyers. I had nowhere left to go but down. She laid the boots at Newsom's feet. You didn't just forget him. You replaced him. Gasps echoed through the studio. Newsom opened his mouth, but the words caught. Karoline let the silence hang. You think this is political? You think I'm here for points? I'm here because I refuse to let the people who built this country be buried under your broken priorities. The moderator finally spoke, voice strained. We need to go to commercial. Karoline didn't move. She stared down Newsom like a woman who'd waited her whole life to say what the whole country had been feeling. No, she said. Let them hear it. Let them see the boots. Let them ask why a state with one of the highest tax rates in America can't seem to find room for its own sons and daughters, unless they break the law to get here. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the commercial cue failed to roll. The audience remained frozen, all eyes shifting from the pair of dusty boots to the California governor, whose silence had become its own indictment. Karoline didn't flinch. She let the weight of the moment settle like dust on a forgotten grave. I met his mother, she continued, her voice quieter now, cutting deeper. She told me she begged your office for help. Wrote letters. Called every agency. Do you know what she got in return? She held up a paper, an official letter with a signature from a state housing agency. A rejection, because she couldn't prove her son was currently homeless in a qualifying shelter. He was living in a car, Governor. A Chevy Impala. He died in it. Newsom shifted uncomfortably, trying to speak, but Karoline leaned forward, pinning him with a glare. You have the gall to talk about human dignity while enforcing sanctuary policies that provide wraparound services for those who break our laws, while veterans like Staff Sergeant Ramirez bleed out in silence. Gasps and scattered applause rang out again. Newsom finally broke. You're weaponizing one man's tragedy to paint a false narrative. Karoline didn't blink. No, I'm humanizing the crisis you pretend doesn't exist. She stepped back and addressed the audience. California spent over $2 billion on illegal immigrant assistance in the past fiscal year. Meanwhile, the Department of Veterans Affairs in this state is underfunded, understaffed, and overwhelmed. Is that leadership? Newsom interrupted. We do support veterans. Karoline spun on him. Then name one policy your administration passed this year that prioritized a homeless veteran over an illegal immigrant. Silence. She waited. The moderator looked down at his tablet, uncomfortable. Karoline raised the boots again, gently this time. These weigh nothing. But they carry the weight of a nation's shame. And you, she turned to Newsom again, you call yourself progressive? There's nothing progressive about stepping over the dead to virtue signal on cable news. The screen behind her shifted to a black and white photo, Luis Ramirez in uniform, smiling. You let him die. And there are thousands more. We won't forget, and we won't let this pass. The room was still. Even the cameras hesitated. Newsom's polished demeanor had cracked. For the first time, his silence was not strategic, it was surrender. Karoline didn't let the silence dissolve. She pierced it. You wear tailored suits, travel with a taxpayer-funded entourage, and stand behind gated mansions guarded by security. He wore body armor. He slept in sand. He guarded this country while you, she nodded toward Newsom, crafted press releases. The camera cut to Newsom's face. Pale. Tense. He adjusted his lapel, but his eyes betrayed him, he had no comeback. Karoline stepped to center stage, holding the photo of Ramirez now with both hands. The boots were behind her, the flag folded neatly on the table beside them. It wasn't a political stunt. It was a memorial. When Luis Ramirez came home, he didn't ask for special treatment. He asked for help. But what did your administration give him? She asked, raising her voice just enough. A system rigged against its own people. Newsom tried again to cut in. Our policies. Our policies? Karoline turned. Your policies guaranteed medical insurance to thousands of undocumented immigrants while Ramirez was denied mental health care. He couldn't get a VA appointment for 6 months. The room reacted, not with applause, but with quiet dread. Because she wasn't shouting. She wasn't grandstanding. She was grieving, and grief doesn't lie. Karoline then pulled out a manila folder and opened it slowly. IFOI'd every single state grant, aid disbursement, and housing contract awarded to nonprofits assisting illegal immigrants over the past 2 years. The total, $2.16 billion. She slid a single-page summary across the moderator's desk. Meanwhile, she said, voice heavy now, veteran suicide hotlines went unanswered during weekends. PTSD clinics in Fresno closed. Ramirez was turned away twice. Newsom interjected again, this time frustrated. You're turning this into a circus. You're making a tragedy political. Karoline whipped around. No, Governor. You did, when you chose press optics over policy. You did, when you handed out housing vouchers on live TV to non-citizens while Ramirez slept in a car, parked across the street from a shelter that wouldn't take him. A long pause. Then Karoline turned to the audience, calm now. If your leadership means veterans die while you cut ribbons for photo ops, then you don't lead. You parade. The air tightened. Newsom looked away, lips pressed shut. And Karoline placed the photograph of Ramirez on the moderator's table. A challenge. A record. A mirror. Karoline didn't just place the photo of Luis Ramirez on the table, she stood over it like it still breathed, like the soul behind those eyes deserved to be heard one more time. His last text wasn't to a politician, she began, her voice measured, haunted. It wasn't to a VA officer, or a benefits hotline. It was to his little sister. She pulled a printout from the folder, slowly unfolded it, and read. Sorry I'm not strong enough. Tell Mom I tried. I love you. A hush crushed the auditorium like a weight. Gavin Newsom blinked rapidly, swallowing a lump in his throat. Even the moderator sat back in her chair, stunned. Karoline didn't move. He was found in his truck, she said. Right outside a clinic that was fully funded, just not for him. Then she looked right at Newsom. You know which clinic I'm talking about. You cut the ribbon there. It's in your schedule. Want me to read the speech you gave that day? Newsom didn't answer. You praised California's commitment to inclusion. But for Ramirez, who wore this nation's uniform, there was no door open. She stepped closer. You keep saying I'm making it political. You're right. She turned to the crowd. It is political. It's political when our leaders prioritize the optics of compassion over the responsibility of service. It's political when Gavin Newsom hands billions to sanctuary programs but won't fund a 24/7 crisis line for combat veterans. She lifted the small American flag that had been placed beside Ramirez's boots. He didn't want a flag on his coffin. He wanted a reason to live. That broke something in the room. One man in the back audibly gasped. A woman near the front wiped a tear. The silence wasn't just grief, it was recognition. Everyone in that hall knew this moment wasn't rehearsed. It was real. It hurt. Newsom, now visibly flustered, tried to pivot. We've allocated millions to mental health. Karoline cut him off. Not for Luis. And not in time. She paused again, then walked back to the microphone. You know what the real insult is? She asked the crowd. That we've reached a point where saying put veterans first makes people uncomfortable. She turned back to Newsom. Maybe if Ramirez had crossed the border illegally, he would have had a place to sleep. But he crossed oceans to serve. And you left him to die. The moderator opened her mouth but said nothing. And Karoline, without flinching, held the folded flag close to her chest and stood in silence. For Ramirez. For every vet watching. And for every politician who still didn't get it. The silence that followed Karoline's stand was suffocating. For Gavin Newsom, it was the sound of his political armor cracking under real human loss. He adjusted his blazer, leaned forward toward the mic, and with the forced calm of a man cornered, began to deflect. "Miss Leavitt," he said, his voice oiled with restraint, "California is proud to lead the nation in progressive policies. We've housed over 90,000 people in the last year alone. We've expanded clinics, mental health services." Karoline didn't blink. She raised her hand mid-sentence like she was swatting away a lie. "Stop hiding behind percentages, Governor," she snapped. "Luis Ramirez isn't a policy success. He's a casualty of your priorities." She pulled out a laminated chart. The screens behind her lit up with cold, brutal numbers. "Here's your own budget summary," she continued. $1.4 billion for undocumented services, $226 million for veterans. Want to explain that gap? Newsom sat back, tight-lipped. She turned toward the audience. "You keep hearing numbers like they're abstract. But I've seen what they mean. I've walked into tents behind VA hospitals. I've prayed with men who served this country and now sleep in parking lots." She raised a photo, taken just 3 weeks ago, of veterans lined up outside a shelter in San Diego. Beneath it was a date and time, 4:17 a.m. "This isn't a talking point," she said. "It's a disgrace." Newsom tried to interrupt, waving a hand as if trying to catch his balance in a storm of facts. "We have a multifaceted plan. And it's failing," Karoline cut in, louder now. "Because your priority isn't service, it's spectacle." She stepped forward again, tapping the podium. "You build shelters faster for illegal immigrants than you do for veterans. You fund legal aid for border crossers, but slash reintegration programs for soldiers." Then, with a chilling calm, she delivered the line that would go viral in hours. "You're not running a sanctuary state. You're running a betrayal." Gasps filled the room. The moderator tried to pivot, but Karoline wasn't done. "You promised California would be a safe haven," she said. "Tell that to the Gold Star moms who can't afford headstones for their sons." She pulled out one final card, a copy of a GoFundMe page. "This is how we bury heroes now." Her voice cracked just once. Then she inhaled and finished. "You want to lead a nation, Governor? Then start by leading one veteran home." There were no cheers. No applause. Just the heavy silence of a truth no spin could erase. Just as Karoline finished, a producer's voice crackled into the moderator's earpiece, "We need to wrap, cut to break, now." Cameras started to pan wide, and a red, commercial, light flashed above the stage. But Karoline didn't step back. Instead, she reached down and pulled something from beneath the podium. It was a folded American flag. The moment froze. She held it up, both hands firm, and said clearly into the mic. "This flag isn't for sale. And it's not a background prop for your re-election ads." Newsom blinked, visibly stunned. "This was handed to me by a veteran's wife. Her husband served 3 tours. He died in a hospital hallway, waiting for care your administration defunded." A shot of the flag filled the screen, creased, worn, stained slightly at one edge. "She told me, if they won't honor him, maybe you will. And I will." She turned toward Newsom. "You talk about dignity, but you've turned this state into a place where veterans are numbers, illegals are assets, and anyone who questions you is labeled cruel." The moderator whispered again, urging for a wrap, but Karoline ignored it. "This isn't about being right-wing. It's about being right. And this flag, this man's service, wasn't partisan." She paused. "Let the silence say what no poll ever could. This country is cracking under leaders who fund optics over honor. And tonight, America heard where your heart really is, Governor." She stepped back, lowered the flag, and placed it on the podium. And the screen didn't cut to commercial. It lingered. The camera never blinked. Even the studio crew, who had strict instructions to cut away, stood frozen. Karoline's words still echoed in the silence, and that flag, creased, trembling slightly in her grip, said more than any politician had dared utter in months. Then it happened. One by one, members of the live audience stood up. A veteran in the third row raised his hand to his brow in a silent salute. A young woman near the aisle clutched a photo of her brother, killed in action, eyes brimming with tears. A father, arms crossed tightly over a folded American flag in his lap, nodded slowly. And Gavin Newsom? He didn't say a word. He looked at the crowd, at the flag, then at Karoline. His smirk was gone. He tried to find a line, a comeback, anything. But all that came out was, "We're trying our best." Karoline stepped forward. Trying doesn't excuse betrayal. The moderator, visibly shaken, tried to pivot. "Well, we appreciate both guests," but it was too late. The moment had shifted. Karoline didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice again. She simply walked to the center of the stage, placed the flag back in its case, and looked directly into the camera. This isn't about politics. It's about priorities. You can't claim to stand for justice while letting heroes sleep on sidewalks. You can't call this compassion while veterans die waiting and criminals get funded. She took a breath, then added, "You chose them over us. And tonight, we chose to say, never again." A final shot of the flag filled the screen. Then the crowd, now fully on their feet, burst into applause that drowned out every talking point left in Newsom's folder. This wasn't just a debate. It was a reckoning. Karoline didn't come to win applause, she came to defend those forgotten. While politicians like Newsom write checks for chaos, she brought the truth wrapped in a flag folded with sacrifice. And when the lights faded, it wasn't her voice that lingered. It was Charlie's. It was every veteran left behind. And it was the sound of a nation finally saying, enough.